Hello and welcome to another episode of Is It Bloody Working? I'm JJ Stenhouse, and with me as ever is Alexia Leachman. Hi, Alexia.
Hi, JJ. How's it going?
It's going well. We've had a good week this week, haven't we?
We've had a
We-
really busy week, actually. There's been some good stuff going on. I've been knee deep in tech again, testing stuff and making sure that things actually work. We're testing one of our anxiety profiles. We've got two at the moment that we're working on, and adding the ability for practitioners to be able to buy a bundle of them for their clients. Because when I put this past my practitioners, they're like, "Oh, can we get this for my clients? Can we buy it for them?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. I need to look at that." So that's what I've been trying to figure out this week, and hopefully what we're building is something where the practitioner can buy an assessment and then they can buy a bundle of five, say, and then they put a code in and then they give the code to their client and then the client redeems it, gets their report, and then the practitioner gets a copy of it in clinical language for them, so they can both be working off the same information and get going like at a much more advanced stage than they would if they didn't have the assessment. So we're really excited about that because I can't wait to get that ready.
We are. And just for viewers, listeners who might not be au fait with what we're up to, this is for Ladder of Growth, and it's a measurement tool, which means that you can really work out, see where you are in terms of your growth. And it's almost like we can create this map for you, or indeed an architecture. We're going to be talking today about internal architecture, internal emotional architecture.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we do. But to explain what that is, this is what this episode is all about. What do we mean when we say your internal emotional architecture? And actually, not just emotional architecture, is it?
No, it's a little bit, it's broader than that. It's really how and other people might describe it as your internal operating system. But I think
Yeah.
architecture is a really nice way of describing it because it speaks to structure and it also speaks to movement through something. When you think about a building and the architecture of space and how architects will design a space so that you can move through it and use it, that's what's going on inside of you, that you are using your emotions, you are using like all of those parts of you, your beliefs, your goals, your values, they're all doing something for you and they're all part of this overall structure. But if it's just a big rickety old mess, then they're not going to be able to kind of work together and support you in what you're trying to do. And I think that's why architecture works so well as a way of describing what's going on here, because there are so many aspects of it that we can plug into to help us better understand what's going on inside our heads. And it's not just inside our heads, but inside of us, because
Yeah.
a lot of the time this is just so vague and difficult to grasp. So giving it these words, describing it this way, helps us to get a handle on it and hopefully be able to change things for the better because we can get a grasp of what's going on.
Absolutely. And you think about architects, they draw up blueprints, don't they? So,
Yeah.
what we're talking about is what is the blueprint for your system? What's the blueprint for my system? How is my system operating? And it's not always that easy to identify, but in general terms, the architecture metaphor really works well because we're talking about underlying things which we build upon and build upon and build upon. And if you don't have the underlying structure, the foundations right,
Mm.
then things can fall apart pretty quickly.
Exactly. And I when I first really stumbled upon this, and I didn't really stumble on it, but it was a way of describing this to my clients. There's one client and she came to me, she said, "Oh, I want to expand the business." She was a CEO. She said, I want to grow the business more. I want to do X, Y, Z, and I want to do all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, that's great, but and I'd picked up on that she'd had a lot of childhood trauma that hadn't been processed yet, a lot of stuff that was going on that was keeping her system very heavy and low and fragile. And I said, you can't really, if you think about a house and you wanted to put an extension on it, add another floor to your house, you wouldn't do that without checking that the supporting walls will take the weight.
Yeah.
And it's the same
Yeah.
kind of idea. If you've got a foundation that's really crumbly and creaky and it's got cracks in it, you're not going to be able to add another floor. And adding another floor in this metaphor is all about growing. It's about becoming more, carrying more responsibility, doing more things. And if you haven't got the structure underneath to carry that weight, then the minute you try and put that on, it's just not going to stay. And this is why you have people that move forward in doing certain things and they haven't got the sticking power, it doesn't work, it doesn't pan out. And a lot of people say, oh, you need to increase your capacity to do that. And that's exactly what we're talking about. We need to build more capacity. And that is exactly what we mean. It's how can you build more capacity? Well, it's giving yourself some additional structure so that you can hold this extra capacity that you want to build and add to your system. Is that making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And you wouldn't build a skyscraper on foundations that are just a foot or a meter deep, would you? I mean, that's just not going to work.
Yeah.
So you have to really strengthen up the foundations. But the thing is, then, how do you pinpoint what's going on with those foundations? That's kind of where, dare we say, ladder of growth comes in. But you have to really look at how strong the elements are at the base of your internal architecture and shore those up in order for you to actually be able to carry that weight, carry that load. And, we often we talk about carrying weight a lot, but I think sometimes people don't quite understand what that is. We understand what it is within the architecture metaphor, right?
Mm.
But what does that look like in a person's system?
Now, before I go on to that, I want to kind of go back to what you were saying about the stuff that's deep within you and what's keeping you heavy. And I've got another metaphor for you, JJ,
You've always
which
got
is,
metaphors. I love them.
and it's the one that I call the house of growth. And because a lot of people, they don't know what does it mean to kind of strengthen my foundations. Like, well, what does that even mean? Well, I want to hopefully paint a picture for you that maybe help you understand that. And if you think about, and I've probably mentioned this already, but think about you as being this great, wonderful English country manor home. And I think we talked about the doors of the front door last week with resistance and sabotage and all of that. Well, the same house is what I'm referring to today. Is you go into your large house, which the house of growth, and in order for you to start climbing the stairs, going higher in the house, well, you're not going to do that if the minute you open the door, it's full of dusty cobwebs, and you're like, well, I can't see what's going on in here. The first thing you're going to want to do before you run up to the attic is you're going to want to go through the ground floor, maybe open some windows, open the curtains, let some of the dust out, and see what's going on. And then when you imagine these dusty houses that are just full of all the horror films have got them, like the kids just wander in the middle of the night and they're like moving all the cobwebs out the way. You are going to want to let the light in and see what you're dealing with. And that ground floor is where there's a lot of good stuff that a lot of us tackle in normal personal development. We're looking at our values, we're looking at our goals, we're looking at things that happened to us when we were kids, all that kind of stuff that we're going to want to deal with. But then when you go through, imagine you've walked through the house, you've opened all the curtains, and you're like, ooh, there's a smell. What is that smell? And you go through all the rooms, you're like, oh no, I don't know what it is. What is it? And you think, oh my God, there's a cellar. There's a cellar, everyone. And you realize the smell's coming from the cellar. So the cellar is where you go, and there's all that hidden stuff that you didn't even know you had. So
All
this
the
is
gunge, all the nasties.
the nasty stuff that is giving a whiff to the whole house.
Yeah.
That's your childhood trauma that you can't even remember. These are micro traumas that you don't even know you've had. These are inherited traumas, generational traumas, things that are beyond your conscious awareness, but are affecting you in very important ways. And so then you need to, before you can think about going up the stairs and dealing with the upper floors and making them nice, the first thing you need to do once you've made some light spill into the floor of the ground floor is head into the cellar and sort that out. And that's the kind of order that you want to work through the house of growth is, yes, start on the ground floor, go through the obvious places for you to start, like your values and your the known childhood traumas you've got, your goals and your beliefs and all of that good stuff that we always see as part of any personal development work. But then at some point you've got to head into the cellar, and there's no getting away from that, really. A lot of people escape it. They don't want to do it. Some people, and you might know people like this, JJ, if they saw a beautiful house like this, they'd be like, oh my good, they could stand in the garden, they could look and see this wonderful upper level terrace that just looks like it's got the best views of all the surrounding area, and they can spot a trellis and they're like, oh, I'm going to climb up that trellis and jump onto that upper terrace. I can't be bothered going to that musty old dusty house, it looks like a nightmare. And so they just jump up the side. Now that is what many people get drawn to, and let's call it spiritual bypassing, shall we call it? Did I just say that? I don't know if I just said that.
You did just say that, yeah.
Those people that try out all those spiritual, I do this in inverted commas, activities or things that they think make them appear more spiritual. But actually, if you do take the shortcut and clamber up the trellis, you're missing important structural work that's going on beneath. Because if you are doing things like remote viewing or channeling or using any of the clairs, for example, if you're bringing in information that is not landing in a system that's clean, then you're bringing it in through dirty filters.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
can't get away from doing that important inner work.
Yeah, and that takes me back to what I'm about a lot. It's that clarity, right? We have to clear our systems before we can actually take on board all that there is to take on board, all the information that's out there for us to take on board. We that's consciousness. That's that expansion of consciousness, and you can't do it if you're anchored by all this weight,
Yeah.
right? So all this weight, what does that look like? Because we've talked about the architecture of the house. We've talked about how we have to clear the gunge that's in the cellar. And as we go up, clear away the cobwebs, all of that sort of thing. Something that I've been doing for most of my life, it feels like. But it's something that just continues as we move on. I don't think we ever get to that point where we're totally clear. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But what does it look like when we're carrying weight? So, in other words, is it that we are just, lethargic? Where is that weight? Is it in our heads? Is it in our minds? Or is it in our bodies? I mean, there is a body of work that says that we do carry trauma and patterns within our actual tissues of our body. It's not just all in the mind. So, what do you say that looks like?
Well, when I think about the weight that we're talking about here, I think that the weight is in all of those places actually, because I know from the work I do with releasing tension and traumas and conflicts that there's a huge body release for a lot of people, and they feel it moving from their bodies, and they find they're able to move more, have more fluidity in their movement afterwards. And we know that there are techniques like TRE, for example, where people are actively shaking trauma out of their body, and that makes a huge impact. And body workers report this a lot as well when they're helping, they're doing deep massage and Feldenkrais work, or all of those kind of things. People will have these big emotional releases as part of body work. So I think we're all fairly we all understand that there's a lot of this stuff that is in the body, but it is also in the mind in the way that it feels heavy and keeps you low. And when I think about what that means in terms of structure, if you think about a structure that's weighed down by a lot of heavy weights, and I can't help thinking about this, let's say a rickety old wooden structure you might find in a kid's playground, like a climbing frame thing. And if you think about climbing one of these wooden structures and you get on it and you feel it kind of wobbles and you hear it creaking and you've got to climb up to go and get to the top level. You're like, well, this is wobbling a bit. Is that cracky bit? Am I going to step and put my foot through there? Can I walk across that wooden pirate bridge? Or am I just going to fall on the floor? Like, how safe is this structure for me to climb onto?
I was thinking of that trellis that you talked about earlier, right?
No,
That's not very safe.
no, exactly. So if you think about this kind of rickety wooden structure, you need to have faith that this structure is going to support your weight, and that when you go walking across the little wooden bridge, whatever, your foot's not going to go falling through. And so having this strength, this internal resilience, knowing that if you lean on something, some part of yourself, you will be there to catch yourself. This is about having inner trust that you have your own back, trust that you won't lose your rag over somebody criticizing you or whatever, that you have got it, you have got yourself covered, and that you're not going to leave yourself vulnerable or exposed emotionally because of the way that you're reacting to the world around you. So having this firm footing, having a structure that can take the load of the world and the experiences that you're having, I think is really, really important. But the next bit is if you want to grow, if you want to take on more responsibility. So again, I think back to business owners that I work with, they want to grow their business, they want to do more, or people that are ambitious, they want to go and do the next level of their life, whatever the next level of their life looks like. And that's going to require, in architectural terms, putting an extension on the top floor, right? Now, you're not going to go and extend upward on your structure if the foundations can't take that weight, can't take the additional responsibility, the additional thinking and processing that's going to come from adding more to your life, right? Even though adding more might also be streamlining and stripping back in many ways, there's an adding more going on there. And so you need to have the structure to support that. So don't start adding extra floors to whatever you're doing if you've still got a stinky cellar, right? Because that's going to creating this rotten wood thing that means you're going to put it up there and it's all going to come crashing down. And what does that look like in reality? It means that you try and grow, you try and do the next level of growth, whatever that looks like for you, and then you fall back to where you were again because it doesn't have the weight to carry the additional capacity that you're putting in there. So this is what we mean by increasing capacity so that you can take this additional load.
Yeah, I'm going to throw another metaphor in here now. You're ready for this, right?
Yeah, I'm ready.
So, talking about growth and talking about wood, I think of trees. And of course, a strong tree is a tree with the most fantastic root system that anchors it and is steady and is where all it gets all its nutrients from. And from that place, it can grow tall and strong. But it can't, it can't fall down in high winds because it's so well rooted. It's got that strength, it's got that foundation. And so when the wind shakes its branches and shakes its leaves, it's just still standing there because it can take it, bring it on. Yeah. I'm here still, right? And nothing really can uproot. Well, all right, we've had a few storms here in the UK lately where a few trees have been uprooted, but it takes something pretty drastic to uproot that tree.
Yeah, yeah. And having that internal strength is and that's what we're measuring with the ladder of growth, is we're enabling you to measure the strength of this internal structure so that you can have a sense of where you can start adding, where you need to strengthen things up, and where there's weakness going on in your internal structure. Because without a lot of personal development is driving blindly. I think some people are now starting to talk about internal emotional architecture, and a lot of people are talking about operating systems as well, emotional operating systems. And so that's a very useful metaphor for us to use because we're very familiar with phones and our computers bugging out and, having apps that are out of date and chewing up loads of, your computer fan going crazy when you're trying to run too many tabs. These are all concepts that we're all familiar with. And so using the operating system metaphor for our emotional system works really well for a lot of people. But unfortunately, just like a lot of us aren't going to start dabbing into the code of our computer because we don't really know what's going on. The same can be said for what's going on in terms of our emotional self. When we go under the hood, a lot of people haven't got that understanding or visibility of what's going on to be able to start really tinkering effectively. And I think a lot of inner work around the emotional self is going in blindly and maybe just prodding around and not really understanding what that structure looks like and where things come from, to be able to know that if you move this over here, that you're going to affect that over there. That, I think, is still relatively new in the field. There's a lot of people that have a very deep understanding of why something's there, but that's a very different piece of work to what happens if I do this, what will happen, how do we change things and bring about X results? I think there's a lot of work around the why, but not necessarily a lot around, well, how do we change it? How do we change this structure and get a specific outcome?
Yeah, and psychologists talk about internal working models. In other words, Bowlby wrote about this a couple of decades ago. It's a term for internal emotional architecture, but the argument there was that early relationships create these mental models which operate outside awareness, and they can shape later behavior. But what we are talking about here is a bit more than that, isn't it? I mean, it's not just neuroscience, it's not just mapping behaviors from early experience. It's something a lot broader than that.
Yeah, I think the bit that I want to try and get across is that there's almost like a little spectrum, if you like, that I've observed at least, and that I've put into the ladder of growth, is that there's a spectrum of behavior and observable behavior and also patterns of thought as well that will precede the behavior in many instances. Is that you will shift along as that one aspect of yourself becomes stronger. So, for example, if we say, around how are you around losing control, for example, well, there are going to be at one end of the spectrum, there are going to be some people that when they have a sense that they might lose control over something or suddenly have control wrestled out of their hands, that might trigger a big emotional reaction. They might feel very unsafe, very, very, very panicky. and very unsure of themselves. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got somebody that when they're faced with a situation where they might be losing control over something, they're like, okay, well, next. They're just not bothered by it.
Yes,
So that
exactly.
spectrum of, from somebody that spirals into a panic attack, up to the person that really isn't bothered, that along that spectrum, there are very many different increments of behavior, and there are changes in how you respond to those situations, and that's what we've been mapping. So if you imagine this spectrum exists on all aspects of behavior, all lots of situations that you face in life, and therefore the strength of your structure around losing control, we can map that. Now we can also map the structure on how, in terms of how you respond around something else. How you feel about responsibility, or being given responsibility. Some people love being given responsibility. Oh, I'm the one deciding what we're doing on Saturday. Brilliant. We're all going to go to my favorite pizza restaurant, and they've got the responsibility and they get to be in control. Other people, you give them the responsibility, and they're like, no, 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 no. If I make a decision, no one else likes it. Everyone's going to blame me. I'm not going to be the popular one.
Yeah.
And they shy
Yeah.
away from it. So immediately on the sense of responsibility, we can see straight away how strong someone's system is at the idea of being given responsibility. So you think about the rickety old climbing frame. If you put your foot on that one, they're going to put their foot right to the floor because they haven't got any strength around the idea of responsibility. And that's what we're talking about. When you start mapping that structure or the internal strength you have around all these different aspects of your being, of your life, that's where you start having a sense of this overall structure that's going on, your emotional architecture.
Absolutely. And we talk about trauma, and I think we need to be a little bit more explicit about what we mean by trauma as well, because a lot of people who are listening to this will say, well, I haven't had any trauma.
Yeah.
That's not me. I haven't had anything like that shape my life and my behaviors. But, we're not talking about people who've just had PTSD, and which is awful. And, not we're not saying that these people shouldn't be recognized and shouldn't be helped, but a lot of people have minor micro traumas which do shape how they show up in the world.
Yeah. I remember when I was reading lots of blogs, as I'm sure a lot of people do when they're really interested in sorting themselves out around. And I was like, well, I've got all these signs of trauma. And I was like, but I haven't had any trauma.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
of course now I know very differently, but I didn't, I associated trauma with being what I now call big T trauma, like being in a plane crash or a big car accident, having this big
exactly. Yeah.
dramatic event in your life, fighting in the war, like those kind of things. Whereas actually trauma is a lot more nefarious than that. It's a lot more sinister. And that these micro traumas are these things that just gather over time and pile up. But it's not just the ones that you experience yourself, it's the ones that you inherit, the ones you experienced before you were pre-verbal, when you were 0 years, 1 day old, 0 hours old, like on your birth, when you were in utero, when you inherited as part of the family line. These are all things that are also impacting you. So for somebody to sit there and go, oh, I've not had any traumas, that's a massively naive point of view that doesn't really take into consideration all the places that might be shaping the way that you're reacting and the reason why you're reacting and you have trauma responses, even when you don't think you've experienced trauma.
Yeah, and then you build upon that. It's called allostasis. So allostatic load is when you have a trauma, something goes on, and then you get more and more wear and tear from stress that's adding to that, and it builds. And it can become quite disabling. It can be quite hard to shift because often actually you don't know where that comes from.
No, the way I describe it, like it's another metaphor, I'm afraid, JJ.
Oh,
That if you
go
imagine
on.
you're in the garden doing your like cutting your rose bush as you do, and you scratch your hand, right? And one scratch from a rose bush, you're like, oh yeah, and you forget about it. But imagine you take that same spot you just scratched and scratch it again, and then again, and then again, and before you know it, you that's a big infestation, that's a big infection you've got going on. And now it doesn't take a rose bush to bring that out. Even just putting your top on, your clothes on will make that feel really bad. Somebody could just drag a ribbon along it and you'd be like, oh, that really hurts. Because now you've got a wound there. Now you've got something there that is very, very sensitive to anything that's similar to that rose bush. And even if it's not the rose bush and it's just like a very simple silk ribbon, it'll still feel as painful as the rose bush, which is why when we have these wounds, sometimes it just takes something very similar, not even very similar to the original thing that set it off, to suddenly make the pain come back in a very big way. And this accumulation that goes on, and this is that load that we're talking about, that more you have this accumulation, that you stack these experiences one on each other, then it just adds to that weight. And this is what needs to be sort of rooted out and cleared so that you can just be clear of it all, and move on. Because that's once it's, as it still irritates, if it continues to irritate you, it continues to rub on that same wound, you're never going to be able to heal that wound. You're never going to be able to move on. So you need to be able to do that.
Yeah, you do. And we're not saying that the brain isn't involved in all of this at all either. I mean, we know that that there's been work done on the brain's network, how it works and how it has different ways of responding and making other things happen in our bodies, right? The brain is very important, but it isn't just the brain. It is elsewhere in our bodies. Our bodies do hold trauma. And, people talk now about there being 3 brains in the body: the head, brain, the heart, and the gut. We're a much more complex thing than people tend to think about these days. We have much more going underneath the hood, as they say, than, that many of us kind of understand. And it's really fascinating to get under there and have a look at that architecture and see what is weak and is about to crash and burn.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's when you do, speaking of crashing and burning, when you do have a lot of load coming through, if you don't pay attention to where the cracks are appearing, where the creaking is happening, where you think it's going to break, that's where burnout starts coming, right? That's the burnout that happens, is when suddenly that breaks and suddenly there's nothing there to hold you up and you literally fall to the floor. That's what goes on. People describe burnout, they just can't function, they can't think straight, they just retreat to bed. And they think that going home and spending 3 weeks in bed is going to sort burnout. No, it's not.
I thought that
might
once.
help you. That might help you short term, but it doesn't solve
No.
it doesn't get to the root of why that happened in the first place. It might give you another, you might get up and have another 6 weeks of runway, but that's not going to solve the problem. Getting rid of the root of burnout is an entirely, it's a lot more than just going to bed for a few weeks.
Yeah, and burnout's a really good example of how it's really this weight that we're talking about. This, it's a measurable physiological state. It's not just mind, and people talk about mind over matter. Well, yeah, that we can do that, but what's going on underneath? You can't just suddenly wish away a whole load of gunge in the basement.
No, you can't. And that's why we've got our burnout risk assessment. So we measure that what the tension that creates burnout, we've pinpointed what that is. And we can identify that for you in advance. If you're heading for burnout, you can do a ladder of growth burnout risk assessment and find out where you are likely to burn out. And so that you can take action to prevent it from happening. Because if you are somebody that, let's say you've got a family to support, you've got an important position in the company, and there's teams of people relying on you, you can't afford to suddenly be out of action for a month, 6 weeks, or to lose your income. Because a lot of people, certainly at the top end of the tree in corporate, if they experience burnout, they know that they're probably just going to be exited. Companies aren't very understanding at that level. And so it's in your interest to know if you are going to head for burnout. And if you are, then how to solve it. And that's what we've created with Ladder Growth Burnout Risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And so your internal architecture is a thing that we can see, we can map, we can measure. And it's not just mental, it's also physical, physiological, and emotional. And we can measure all of those things and work out where the foundations are weak, maybe, or where something's about to snap because of the weight that it's carrying. We can do all of these things. And that is how we can really help people move forward and grow and gain that capacity that we need to grow, because we need to have the capacity to hold all the things that life brings to us or throws at us, is probably the way that most people would talk about that. So it's really important that people understand that it isn't just mental, it's not just emotional, it's not, and we can't always just pull our socks up and get on with it, because often we haven't got a clue what's going on.
No, exactly. And that can feel very difficult to, when somebody does tell you that, to just pull your socks. I mean, you might even say that to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Come on, you can get through this. That kind of talk doesn't solve it, because that's not the level at which the rupture has happened. The reason there's something going on here is because there is a rupture, and you have to go to the source of the rupture, the level of the rupture. And that's why having an understanding of these various levels that are going on within you helps, because then you can then go in and operate at the right level to bring about the change. And this is where this idea of internal architecture helps, because then you can have a sense of, okay, it's in the basement. No, it's on the ground floor. It's wherever it is. Okay, that's where I need to go and do change work, because that's where it's going to have the highest impact for me. And that kind of visibility, I think, is really important, because we're in times now where the world's a little bit crazy all around us. It's happening, it's changing so fast that if you are somebody that's not comfortable with change, the rate of change right now is off the charts. So we are facing a world that is triggering us like mad. And so if you're not feeling in a good place, you want to be able to sort this out quickly and not spend months or years exploring possibilities, because that's the kind of time we just don't have anymore. We need to get to the heart of matter quickly, and having an understanding of this architecture, I think, is what's going to help us do that.
I agree. It's never been more important for us to clear our internal systems so that we can grow our capacity to deal with everything that's happening in the world right now. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. So maybe this is a good point to draw things to a close for this episode. And maybe this is where we can move on to our sit spot, which is the time where we invite you, listeners and viewers, to find somewhere to just be quiet for a few moments and think about an issue that might be facing you, something that you just haven't thought about before. And this time, I would ask you just to think about something that you don't consciously want it, but you keep getting that result. So maybe it's you keep going out with the wrong guys or the wrong women, or maybe it's because you're constantly self-sabotaging yourself. You want to shift something but you never quite manage it, or maybe you can't stop yourself shopping, something like that. Just think about that. Put your focus on that for a moment at any point during the week, and see what comes up for you. Why do you think that is? What's that pointing to within your internal architecture? See if you can pinpoint that. It'd be great to hear from you if you can actually come up with an answer. You may not, and that doesn't matter either. But it's nice to just sit in quiet for 5 minutes. I do that every day. Sit and quietly just empty my mind for 5 minutes, or just think of something for 5 minutes and see what comes up. And we would love to hear what that does for you, wouldn't we, Alexia? Do you want to add anything to that today?
Well, what comes to mind when I hear that is if you are somebody that what I call yo-yoing, this oscillation between, let's say you sign up for the gym and then you don't sign, then you don't go after like week 3, and you just bought the annual plan because it was such a good deal, or you decided you're going to go keto this week, or whatever it is that you start and then stop. This kind of yo-yoing, this flip-flopping is on our ladder of growth model, is the bouncy ball. That's why I've called it bouncy ball, because it's this 1 minute you're up there doing the thing, next minute you're not doing it. It's up and down, up and down. This kind of in, yes, I'm all in on the thing. Oh no, I can't do it now. And I go, oh, I can't be bothered. That kind of in, out that goes on is a recognizable pattern. So if you find that is something that you do a lot, that does indicate one of our stages on the ladder of growth, the middle stage. And if you carry on, you can break through into the next stage. So it's not a bad place to be, but recognizing it, identifying it is a really good place to start.
Yeah, and identifying where you are getting that result that you actually don't really want. Maybe I did this the other day. I ate something. I thought I didn't really want to eat that. What did I do that for? Right? What was it that motivated me to do that? I didn't come up with an answer at that point, but I will do at some stage. So for now, though, thank you very much for listening and watching. Alexia, any final words?
No, I think that's it for me this week.
And that's it from me as well. So it's goodbye from us. See you next time.